So look, not everybody's going to be, incredible at what they do, and they're going to be good plumbers and bad plumbers, as I said. But we have the luxury that a lot of what we do outside of the proceduralist kind of things is cerebral, right? And some people have better memories than others. But at the end of the day, we all got through med school and we're capable of using and doing that critical thinking, especially when we have resources.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor! 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 Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Alex Schloe here with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. As always, I'm so glad you're here, taking the time to listen to another episode. So thank you so much. This episode today was really exciting, really fun, a little bit different than our typical real estate-centric episodes. This was focused a lot more on innovation, on entrepreneurship, on some venture capital things as we talk about kind of the digital healthcare revolution. This was a really fun episode with Dr. Gary Goldman. He is a dentist, a MD, physician anesthesiologist. He also has his MBA and has an incredible journey where he's found multiple different companies. And right now, he's the founding, managing partner and CEO for Global Health Impact Network and Funds. That is a health professional founded and managed strategic healthcare venture capital group that's focused on the evolving digital health revolution. And Gary has been involved with innovation in medicine on the digital side all the way back in the 1990s and really has seen things grow, change, and be molded over time. And we talk about what the future may look like in 5 to 10 years. So this was a really fun episode with Dr. Gary Goldman. We'll go ahead and get started. Dr. Gary Goldman, welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast. I am so grateful to have you on the podcast tonight. How are things going in sunny California?
Things are great. Weather's nice. It's a little bit windy and not too hot, unlike many other places in this country right now. So I can't complain.
Yeah, absolutely. We just got back from a camping trip. We were in Glacier National Park and it was 94 degrees, which was wild, and we were not prepared for it. But now it's beautiful out here in Colorado. As you can see behind me, the sun's setting. So it was a beautiful day. Well, looking forward to having you on the podcast. I will say you are the most qualified person we've had with DDS, the MD, and the MBA. And so really excited to learn more about your journey. For folks who don't know you, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, it's never a short story, but absolutely. It's been a career of evolution and I don't call them pivots, but certainly blending from one driven milestone to another. So, I've been a clinician for about 35 years, practicing for about 33. My training I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I'll kind of zoom through it. I started out, I went to SUNY Stony Brook in New York, and there I was a biochem major and got very interested in tech because there they had from Wang Computers, probably a name not most people know, it preceded IBM. Well, he gave a huge grant to Stony Brook, and they had a very, very big computer sciences division and building. This was back in 74 when programming was taking a huge box of cards in like a shoebox and bringing it to a computer center and then putting your program in and see if it works on paper. So that's really where that nidus came for me about technology and always being interested. And, I always say a little bit jokingly, there's two groups that I subscribe to. One is whoever dies with the most letters after their name wins. And the second one is whoever dies with the most toys when they die win, in terms of electronics.
That's awesome.
So it's always been a little bit of a joke of mine. So fast forward, I wound up, I believe it or not, and this is not made up, I had a dentist when I was like in middle school and high school who was an innovator. Shockingly, he was ahead of his time. He had a black and white mini TV mounted to his dental chair in 1968. Talk about like advanced, there were barely TVs then. So, and he always used to show me everything that he was working on in his lab. And it really kind of made an impression on me because I grew up from a poor family, and I was, one of the first, certainly in my family, to go to college. So for me, seeing somebody so educated and so wanting to give back and doing all this research, really, unknowingly at the time, made an impression for me. So it's one of the reasons that I chose to go to dental school. So I applied to dental school and got in, went to NYU. I was in the last 3-year program that they had, and I was liking it, but I figured out fairly quickly that I didn't have a lot of artistic ability. I was never an artist. I was more always an athlete, and a little bit of a nerd. And what to be a good dentist is like trying to be a good plastic surgeon if you don't have artistic ability. So I had the the hand-eye coordination and the knowledge base, but I knew I would never be great at like the cosmetic part of it. So in my last year, was in New York City, right across the street from a very, very famous hospital, Bellevue, which a lot of people have heard before, but a lot for trauma, a lot for psychiatry, a lot of crazy things always happen there over my whole life in the papers. And there was a sign up in my clinic where I had my little office in the 3rd year, and it said, any dental student who wants to do a month of anesthesiology at Bellevue, right across the way, sign here. And I remember looking at it, and there were no names on the list at all. And I looked at it and I said, I have no idea how this would benefit me in any way, shape, or form. Because remember, this is back in the early 80s. There weren't even outpatient dental anesthesia centers, meanwhile, anything else. So as a dentist, how would I use that? We didn't do sedation in the office in those days. So I said to myself, but a chance to be in the operating room at Bellevue for a whole month? I'm there. So, again, all joking aside, I was so nervous about being a dentist in a medical school environment. And I didn't know at the time, and I can say this comfortably as an anesthesiologist, that most medical students, the anesthesia rotation isn't real high on their list about, how they really want to do well. It's just a small percentage of students in a class that want to be anesthesiologists. So I bought the book that the residents read in the first 6 months. And it's kind of a story for another time, but the lead author in that became a friend of mine through another doctor that I was working at. So it's funny how things just tied together. So I bought this book and I was so nervous. It was, 180 pages. I bought it and I memorized it. I showed up as the Doogie Howser of anesthesia, and I was a dentist on top of it. So the month was very fun, very educational. And there's a lot of pharmacology, especially when you're on the anesthesia side of things, a lot of anatomy on the surgery side. So I really just had a great learning experience there. And I was such a Doogie Howser that by the end of the month, they literally let me put a bunch of patients to sleep with the resident and the attending
That's
with
awesome.
me. And so I had this amazing experience. And I said, oh my God, I love this. I love this. And it turned out when I got back to school, I did a little research and with a couple of my attendings. And it turned out that there were 2 places in the country that trained dentists to do a year of anesthesia along with the physicians as residents, and then with the idea of taking it back into the ambulatory environment and being dentists that were comfortable with taking care of patients who had complicated medical histories, some even to the point where some were doing a little bit of sedation in the outpatient setting. I would always joke about that. It's like, well, what's the definition of somebody who needs anesthesia? I said, well, anyone who is really anxious in the dental chair. And I said, that's every single patient they go to see. So, except for me, because I got to watch TV when I was a kid, right? In the dental
1968.
chair. Yeah, exactly. So basically, I wound up doing a year of anesthesia as a residency after I graduated, and it was a spectacular year. And you got the chance to do everything. I was doing neuro cases and cardiac cases, of course, with the attendings and all that. But we learned so much, and I fell in love with anesthesia. Well, it turned out that only one of the guys on the staff at that particular OR where we were being trained, which was all physicians, was a DDS anesthesiologist. He had done a year years and years and years ago. He was like almost twice my age. And he had been doing this his whole career. And he opened up 3 offices, and this is in Philadelphia, where he would give a little bit of sedation, but he would also let other dentists bring complicated patients to his chair so that if, God forbid, anything happened medically, he was there to intervene as a dentist trained as an anesthesiologist. So it was brilliant. Well, most of the people who went into this program were more going into like oral surgery, the people who really would have used it in their practice or in the setting where they work. So I was a rare breed to be just a general dentist with barely any clinical experience, close to none, that wanted to do it. Well, this gentleman offered me a job. So I wound up taking, once I finished the year of anesthesia, I moved into a practice that had 3 offices where we had 3 basic outpatient dental anesthesia centers. So it was a really solid education. It made me as an individual, no matter whether I was a DDS or an MD, I was very comfortable in that anesthesia and anesthesia provision environment. So, and it turned out to be a real benefit. So I practiced for about 3 years, loved what I did. And one day, this is a true story, my partner comes up to me, he goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing here?" Because I was very young. I skipped a year in between 7th and 6th to 8th, which you could do in the New York school system. And then I gained a year with the 3-year dental program instead of the 4-year program. So I was really young. And basically, he said to me, "You're at the beginning of your career." He says, "Which one do you like better, the anesthesia or the dentistry?" And I said, "Do you have to really ask me that question?" Because he was the same as me. And he said to me, "Well, you're half my age." He said, "You should go back to medical school and be a full-fledged anesthesiologist." And I said, "I don't know." I said, "I'd love to do it, but I think my dad would probably shoot me if I ever told him I was going to go back to medical school." I was making more money in a month than he made in his whole career. They were pretty poor. So he said, "I'll talk to your dad." And he was this wonderful gentleman. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, but he helped me a bit financially, to get to there, and made the money accessible for the 2 years of medical school and convinced my parents to do it. So I did. I applied and got very high score on that MSKP test where, you go from an international medical school kind of to an American medical school. Well, this was like from dentistry to that. So I only had to do the last 2 clinical years. And I showed up in dental school. How many medical students have intubated, put in A-lines, put in central lines, done complex cardiac cases, of course, all with supervision. But again, it's almost, like working in an environment, and that's how you learn by doing as opposed to just reading a lot about it. So I had a very good medical school experience over the 2 clinical years because I was really very capable and very comfortable in that environment, even though I was a bit young still anyway. And so that was a great experience. And from the day that I went to medical school, I was 100% in my mind going into anesthesia. And I'm to the point where it was almost uncomfortable for a lot of my teachers and my attendings and educators where I went to med school, because I was such an anesthesiologist evangelist. Like I was like a mole in the class. And it turned out that in my class of like 200 people, about 25% went into anesthesia, and they all and the school blamed it on me, which was kind of funny. But so I just started my career there. So that's really where my clinical career started. I did my residency at Brigham and Women's in Boston. I did a fellowship there, and then I did another 6-month fellowship in neuroanesthesia. So I did obstetrical anesthesia and neuroanesthesia. And while I was there, the other great thing that happened was I met my wife at the Brigham. And my wife she's a Harvard grad, and she went to UCSF med school, and she started out in internal medicine, but decided she really wanted OB and did an unusual thing, so she had a year internship in internal medicine, then flipped into the OB department at the Brigham. And they had a medicine student that wanted to do the complete opposite. So that was kind of interesting. So it was almost like they were flipped like baseball cards. And she started her career, and then she did a perinatology fellowship. So she's a high-risk OB. And the reason that that's kind of relevant is that when we met in Boston during our residency, the way I got out to California was, and I always joke a little bit about this, is that, we were introduced. I'm also like a triathlete. So I was doing some some training for a marathon with one of her residents, and her resident kind of introduced the two of us together. And we were on our first date. We were taking a walk on Beacon Street in Boston. And she, started to tell me a little bit about her background. I said, "Oh, I know. Elizabeth told me all about that." She goes, "Yeah, but there's one very important part. I don't know." She said, "I don't know if she mentioned where I went to med school, because, I've been in Boston most of my life. And before that, the Bronx in New York." So I said, well, what? She said, I went to med school at UCSF. And I said, oh, wow. I said, you went all the way to San Francisco? I said, you were a Harvard undergrad and then you could have gone to Harvard. Did you get into Harvard Med? She goes, yeah, I turned them down. I wanted to move to the West Coast. So I had a good reason to understand who I was really with. Somebody who was way smarter than I was. So basically, she looked at me and she said, look, I just want you to know that I am moving out of this frozen tundra for the day that I finish here. And that if you don't want to move to California, don't even ask me for a second date. So, but here we go, 36 years later, 4 children, everything that we're going to talk about. So basically, that's how I got to California. And when I got to California, I took a job with Sutter Healthcare up in the Bay Area, was practicing predominantly obstetric anesthesia and a little bit of everything else. And I was with Sutter Health, which has a 27 hospital system. So, so I started out almost very early as a medical director because I was one of the few people who had that training. The Brigham had a great program and a fellowship for obstetric anesthesia. And I had really a great background in OB. And this was a group that happened to do a lot of obstetric anesthesia, but they didn't really love it. They preferred more to be back down in the OR. So when I came, they were like, okay, you're in charge, you're the medical director, you're going to put this, division together because we have a huge need for it and really very few people that were interested in it. So I was thrown into a position of administrative, experience right away because of that, which was great. And, I worked closely with the obstetric department and closely with the anesthesia department and then critical care department. So it really gave me some great administrative experience. And then at the same time, when we had moved out to the Bay Area, I always had some ideas about how I would like to use some of my technology experience from my earlier days. And this was in 1991 when the internet bubble was building in Silicon Valley. And, I had done some programming earlier and during my residency with Mac, a little bit and a little bit of Windows. And so when I got out to the Bay Area, I had been kind of tracking the internet conceptually, which was in its very early stages. And I had some ideas about how we could use it in healthcare. And one of them was around medical education, continuing medical education, required credits that we all have to deal with and pay for and do it in different ways, right? So basically, I said to myself, why couldn't we do this on the internet, on a computer, and answer a bunch of questions, read a couple of articles and get CME? And so I started to conceptualize this, and sometimes divine intervention steps in. Well, one of my anesthesia fellow partners, his cousin was the president of Maxtor. Maxtor is the one who makes the big hard drives from the old desktops, right? They were famous. They were in Silicon Valley. Well, he was the CEO, the president at the time of Maxtor. And I was having lunch with him with my anesthesia partner one afternoon. We all lived in the same area, and I started pitching him my ideas, just making conversation. So he goes, Gary, there's a couple of good ideas. He says, why don't we pick one and do it? And I looked at him and I said, do it? What does do it mean, He says, well, we could start a company. So I said, I have no idea how to do that. I said, I have no experience. I don't come from a family that was, educated in the business space. I said, my most experience with is running a dental practice. So basically he said, no, we're going to do this. He goes, this is a really good idea. And the one we picked was building one of the first learning management system platforms for the delivery of continuing medical education on the internet.
Let's take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. As a physician, balancing your medical career with a growing real estate portfolio can be challenging. That's where Dr. Doc comes in. They don't just offer loans, they provide tailored financial solutions designed by doctors for doctors. Dr. Doc has already helped customers secure millions fast, headache-free funding for their real estate investments. With their streamlined process, you get quick liquidity, no prepayment penalties, and a soft credit check, meaning no impact on your credit score if a deal falls through. Looking to expand your investment property portfolio? Dr. Doc offers competitive rates and customized options to help you build wealth and diversify your assets. They also offer solutions for consolidating debt or home improvements. Join the thousands of doctors who trust Dr. Doc for fast funding and personalized support. Say goodbye to financial roadblocks and hello to your next investment success.
he made it easy for me. He taught me how to write a business plan, and we put together a team of potential technology, tech builders. And I went out and I did what Gary's good at, is evangelizing. I started evangelizing this idea to everybody in the OR, in the ICU, in the doctor's lounge. And here we were in Silicon Valley at the time. And, in those days, if you put .I in front of anything, you could raise money for it. Well, I raised like close to $3 million in 6 months and started that company. So and one of the
Wow.
one of the nice things about being an anesthesiologist is that, it's not like being primary care and having all these, other aspects of your work that you need to accomplish because you have a population of patients. It's more of a love specialty, right? You take care of a patient, you see them a little bit once post-op, and that's it. So you have a lot of freedom with your time and how it's more malleable. So I was able to do all these other things that that we're talking about, we'll talk about, which is just interesting because it's the main reason. If I had been like an intensivist, if I had been a general surgeon building a practice or an internist, there's not a chance I would have had the time. I would have had the desire probably, but not the time to do it. So I feel blessed that I went into, made that transition into the right specialty to allow me to do the other things that, the inside of Gary really wanted to do. So that was the first company. That company did really well once we had it up and running. We were giving it away, to the doctors to an extent, but we were able to monetize it in other ways in terms of creating the content, making it available. And then we got acquired in like a year and a half by one of the largest offline continuing medical education companies who bought us to go online. So that was kind of like my real MBA. It was that first experience right out of practice. Here I was like a year and a half into practice. So you see all these transitions, and it's been very exciting for me because, my personality is always, okay, I accomplished that. Now what can I do next? So I kind of started that first company. And then, fast forward, we don't have to go through each one, but over the last 5 years, I've had 3 companies total. I had another company during the nursing shortage, which is really interesting because I just talked to a young man who just finished medical school who was doing what we did over again now with this nursing shortage with all the technology. I was so fascinated by it. But what we did was one of the investors from my first company said, now that we got this training platform, he says, what we could do is we could use it to train during the nursing shortage in the kind of like mid to late 90s. We could use it to train nurses internationally to pass the NCLEX licensing exam, maybe giving them a little bit of cultural education and bring them over to the U.S. on a registry. I'm going, God, that's great. That would be now something I could do that would be more international business. So we took the platform from the first company and we went everywhere from Delhi down to Cochin in India and then to Shanghai with another group. And we started training all these nurses. You've heard of Stanley Kaplan, the Kaplan training centers. Well, growing up in Brooklyn, New York, I'm not very good at standardized tests. And so I always use the Kaplan solutions. I remember using it with cassette tapes and, sitting in Kings Highway in Brooklyn in the offices there where he had his first place. So I'm that kind of more auditory learner than I am a visual learner. And I'm glad I figured that out early. So what we did was we basically created a couple of come to the United States as the nurse Kaplan centers all over India and in Shanghai. And we moved 163 nurses in a 2.5-year period. And again, for what I said, the whole time I was doing that, I would go away for a couple of weeks, come back, but I always practiced anesthesia, nights, weekends, whatever. One of the other nice things about obstetric anesthesia was, for me, it was great because it fit into my personality and my circadian rhythm. But, half the work you do is between 10 o'clock and, 7 o'clock p.m. and 7 a.m. And most of my anesthesia partners were not very interested in staying up all night just to do OB anesthesia. And I was like, I would pay you to do it. You don't understand. So for me, it gave me all that flexibility to do shifts while I was staying clinically in touch, administratively in touch, while I was doing these other things in the tech space. So that was company 2. And then what happened was Sutter was putting an Epic, the electronic healthcare record. And with all the experience that I had, they came to me and said, look, we'd love you to be a consultant and help us build out for anesthesia and perioperative services for all 27 hospitals, the Epic build for our system. So then, I became a new thing, but I had never heard. I didn't even know what it was. They said, you'll be an informaticist. I said, great. I'm a physician informaticist now. So, that was more like, do and learn. I actually spent quite a bit of time on and off in Verona, Wisconsin, where Epic was developed. Judy Faulkner was the founder founder of that. So that was kind of a cool experience. And that became a 13-year kind of experience that just ended about 4 months ago. I just decided to stop doing it, but I had been the physician lead for anesthesia and perioperative services for Sutter Health for 13 years. I had a group of 6 other anesthesiologists, analysts, and we would tweak the electronic healthcare records with all the different modifications and keep it up to date per the desires of the clinicians. Okay, and this is going to be a very relevant statement. I want everybody to focus in on that. Per the needs and desires of the clinicians, the most important part, other than the patients. So I did that, and while I was doing that, I met a couple of other anestheticists in the Centara healthcare system, which is in the Southeast. And one was a general surgeon, but he was very much like me in terms of the informatics experience. He had actually started a company where he was building armies of nurses and doctors who were the informaticists for their systems, and they could be hired out to go to go lives in different locations where it would be the doctors and nurses training you, not who knew your workflow as opposed to the analysts. And it was a very successful model. And that was a pretty impressive, I will say, of all of the things that I've done business-wise, what he did was the most impressive. He still maintained his general surgery practice with his anesthesiologist part, did the same, and they ran this entire business out of a laptop.
That's amazing.
So now that's ingenuity. So he came to me, and they were helping us with a go-live in San Francisco and the Sutter healthcare system. At CPMC is the name of the hospital. It's a really good hospital. And we didn't have enough clinicians, so we hired them to help us, and they supplemented us with some other nurses and doctors to do it, as effectively as some other places that we had. So I did that, and he says, I've got this great idea for a company. And I'm like, oh no, not another company. I think my wife will shoot me. But he said, you've done all the components of it. First you did education, then you did staffing. He said, what about credentialing? And I said, don't even get me started on that. That is the most nightmarish workflow in the most archaic way you could possibly do it. I said, I have almost shot my mailman when he delivered me that 75-page credentialing application because it was so cumbersome to fill it out. And I said, and if I gave it to them last year or 2 years ago, why do I have to do it again? Why can't it be in a computer system? And he went, you got it. And that's what they did was they took the entire workflow of credentialing and put it on the cloud, okay? And then they partnered and built APIs to the DEA, state licensing, everywhere where you had to report from to whoever you were credentialing. And they built it in a platform that basically in the background, almost like machine learning now, it updated it for you. So all you had to do was just populate it the first time. It maintained your credentials. And then when you had to credential it with an agency or a hospital or whatever it was, you just basically give them the information and they would send the entire report to that institution. So there were two, hurdles for that kind of business model. One is, got to get it to the clinicians, not just the doctors, but mostly the doctors for what we were doing. And what we did was we gave it away for free because first of all, who were probably the ones that would benefit the most from it were the clinicians because we knew what a nightmare it was to go through it. So we started giving it away to the clinicians. And then when we would reach kind of a critical 30% of a healthcare system, we would go to them and say, you probably would like to subscribe to our platform that we built at the enterprise level because 40% of your clinicians are already using it for free. And we basically, that business really exploded once the platform was finished and it wound up doing very well. But to get to that part of the story, so I was still doing the Sutter work. And then I got a chance to consult quite a few places to help other anesthesia departments build out their build for anesthesia for Epic because of all the experience that I had. And everywhere that I went, all our colleagues, so this is like about 8 years ago, everybody's disenfranchised. They hated Epic. They felt like it added several hours to their documentation day, especially the hospital-based docs. And they felt like there wasn't a lot of clinician input when Epic was originally built to represent the clinician's workflow, kind of like I talked about earlier, in the development, because it would have made it a much better product. It was originally developed as a revenue cycle product, and then they added clinical documentation to it, and I mean, we know the whole story of how EHRs got here. And so basically, I was getting all this feedback from all these clinicians that, they didn't understand the technology stuff that was coming out. They didn't understand that why the healthcare technology solutions that were coming out didn't have enough representation by the clinicians, which I knew the answer to, but, I would listen to them. And basically, they felt like the real innovators of the ideas should be or could be see the clinicians themselves as, entrepreneurs, innovators, all of that. But again, we all spend 90% of our time getting to be this accomplished clinician, and you're there and you want to be a good doctor. So you spend all your time trying to be a good clinician, especially with this expanding knowledge base. And it consumes your time. And that's why we have all this clinician burnout, again, post pandemic, of course, didn't help it either. But just clinicians work, physicians work very, very hard at what they do. And there are a lot of kind of unhappy about it. So that's when the light bulb went off in my head. And I said, you know what? Instead of starting number 4, the company number 4, I said, what we need to do is we need to build an ecosystem, a place on, and now the internet is, of course, come along quite a bit from my first company at this point. So now we've got all our toys and our iPhones and all that. There's got to be a way to create this ecosystem which lets clinicians who are all, look, we know they're capable, we know they have the IQ and the ability, and we know now that a lot of them would like to, at their leisure or their ability, learn about some other things like business, like innovation, like technology. But it's very difficult for them. And who's going to go out and get an MBA while you're an MD with the idea, what are you going to do with it? You're going to go work for McKinsey for, $50,000 when you're an orthopedic surgeon? No. So when you get to make the transition from clinician to business or to the C-suite is not easy because it's a big transition. C-suite's probably not the greatest example, but certainly a business situation. So it makes it very difficult. So I said, but we could create a place that would allow those kind of individuals and even the motivated, just clinicians to educate themselves about technology and somewhat about business if they wanted to, but then let them actively participate. And I said, look, after 3 companies and, every one of my companies was basically capitalized by clinicians. I never went to a venture capital, ever. So all the investors who did well with them, with these companies, they were all investors that I knew from the hospital and from all my connections. So for me, I didn't really understand the whole venture capital concept. But here in this situation, I said to myself, well, maybe, if we're one of the venture capital entities, which is all clinician investors, starts spending more time clinically looking at the companies, not just how technologically beneficial they are, then we'll have more input as to what gets funded and what gets released into our workflow. So I said, you need money to build an ecosystem. I said, so let's start a venture fund. Let's first offer up to clinicians an opportunity to invest, an opportunity to participate in who the companies are that we were interested in investing in. And I could bring the business due diligence, but we could bring in targeted specialists to kind of like talk to the companies, figure out what they're doing right or wrong, what they need to be a better company from a clinical perspective. So we started to put it all together, and the nidus of the network was being created by the individuals who were investing in the fund because it was all clinicians anyway. And so we kind of built this business model, or I should say a workflow model that represented, when the clinicians came in, some would come in because they didn't have to be investors, but if they came in and they wanted to take part in this ecosystem, contribute to it, actively participate, engage, and learn, and then the benefit being they could get opportunities as advisors, clinical advisors to these companies, mentors, learn how to be an entrepreneur, an innovator. And there were some organizations doing that already, and we started working with them collaboratively, other clinician organizations. And we started building this, and that was 7 years ago. And then when we needed to create this platform to promote collaborative communication in a safe environment, not like, being on LinkedIn and Facebook and all that. I didn't know how we were going to do that. And we were getting, we were now having money available to build a platform, and divine intervention steps foot again. And I go to a Society for Physician Entrepreneurs started by Arlen Myers. Well, I know Arlen pretty well. And then they had a chapter in Silicon Valley, and Uli Chetapati, who runs Innovator MD, former Kaiser doc, he was the president of the local chapter. They invited me to come to this meeting because they had heard about the network and fund that I had created. And I go to this meeting, which is just, in the south part of San Francisco. I live in the east part. And so pretty close by. And I get there and I'm meeting everybody, and it was really very well run, educational session about physician entrepreneurism and innovation and some of the local companies that were there. And these 3 guys are there who, they were very quiet, and I walked up to them and I was talking to them, and they asked me what I did, and I gave them the very short version of this story. And they said, basically, oh my God, we work for Tata Industries, and because of my second company with the staffing, I had spent a lot of time in India. I knew who Tata Industries were. They're a multi-billion-dollar business organization that works across multiple verticals, and they had hired these three guys to build a secure collaborative communication platform that had, again, the functionality of like LinkedIn, Slack, Dropbox, Zoom, all of that. And I thought that Uli and the team were like playing a joke on me because they knew my story, and I'm thinking, oh, they're just like having this guy tell me everything that I want to hear. And I said, are you guys joking around with me? And they said, no, we're serious, Dr. Goldman. And they showed me this platform that they had built, which was 100% of what I needed to accomplish getting the network up and running. So we, very quickly took advantage of that because they had the software, which was from Tata. They were given the intellectual property to kind of work with it to make it functional in healthcare in that vertical. And they were going after the federated non-for-profit healthcare environment, March of Dimes, cystic fibrosis, all the associations. They're all very siloed. They're very all disjointed. The state society doesn't talk to the regional society who doesn't, it's just, we felt that it was a real collaborative nightmare. So what they wanted to do is they needed some funding to take the software and start kind of customizing it for that. And I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, my fund will invest in you if you use our fund and our network as your MVP, the model that you build this platform on. And they said, absolutely, if you get us the investment money. So we put a reasonable amount of money into them. Nothing crazy, but enough to get them off the ground. They didn't even have a name for the company. It's now called like LinkedIn Hands In. And it was more of a solution for organizations to use intra-organization to foster collaboration, communication, be like a CRM workflow engine. But with that said, it also was at the top of the hierarchy, a network of those networks. So all those networks collaborate on the same platform. So it really facilitated, active participation by individuals in multiple organizations because it was easier that way. So, yeah, so basically, now fast forward 6 years, we've got 2,500 clinicians globally who are focused on either being, to be a mentor or an advisor to collaborate around all the different types of innovation. And it's broken down all the way to profession, specialty, and subspecialties. So it's not just physicians. It's, I say health professionals now after all that experience. And that means that it's not just clinicians and researchers, but it's also everything else that is necessary to make that functional from a business unit. So if there are lawyers that want to make healthcare better, if there are health, C-suite executives, they're welcome to join our network. So it's all health professionals running the network and investing in the fund and getting opportunities and sharing and working together. So, this has been the culmination of everything that I've done where we are now, and we're expanding it internationally. We're going into the Middle East. We're going into Africa. We're going into India. We're going in a limited way right now into Asia a bit and Latin America, and of course, Europe. So it's huge. It's growing organically. We really don't market it very much. I try to stay under the radar as best as possible most of the time. And it's really just, it's growing into this global organization of clinicians that's focused on innovation, which is just, kind of gives me the chills a little bit. So
That's amazing. What a cool story. And I love the divine intervention throughout. And, we talk a lot about innovation, but I also want to point out, it seems like you were never afraid of just taking action and hopping in, with both feet and really getting after whatever you were doing all throughout the process, which is really hard to do, especially as physicians. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we want to have all the answers for everything before we do it. And, just looking at the letters after your name shows that you're like, hey, I want to be the best at all these different things, and I'm getting after it. And so it's really cool to see how that taking action piece really led to a culmination of all these events in your life that then led to the Global Health Impact Network, which is so cool.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's a valuable lesson that's, definitely, the lessons that I take to my younger colleagues now looking at it is it's not necessarily the step by step, but it's the open-mindedness and not to be afraid to venture into, parts of the galaxy that are unknown, as they said in Star Trek. So basically, don't be afraid to, and again, it's always an extension. It doesn't mean you have to stop doing what you were doing. And we're lucky. Look, I mean, the colleagues who we're talking to and with right now are, we're the lucky ones in many ways. We got through, college and medical school and residency and internship and residency and building a practice. And, that's a huge accomplishment, just in life in general. And it also does, some of it is genomic, as you point out, you are who you are, it's like for me, it's in every aspect of my being, to be the way that you kind of described. And so when you look at it for sports, like, what do you think? So you think I'm a golfer or an ice hockey player with my approach to life, right? So for me, I played varsity college hockey, and then, I've always been very much focused on the athletic part of it. So I've done, like, I don't know, over the last 20 years, 50 triathlons, and I've done, 3 Ironmans, and, but it's all the other part of it. It's just the drive. It's part of your personality and who you are, but how you direct those energies, of course. And it just recently very much showed it's ugly headed in a way. We were talking the other day, and I was sitting there with a bunch of golfers, and I had to tell them this story that when I hurt myself enough when I was in my 40s playing hockey that my wife said, "You're done." So that's when I started triathlons. And basically, oh God, I just kind of lost my train of thought. So what was I going to say? Oh my God, I'm having a little bit of a senior moment here, I think.
Okay.
Oh yeah, well, we can just kind of move on. What was I was just, what was I?
You're with the golfers.
Oh yeah, with the golfers. Thank you.
Yeah.
So basically, I never really played golf because it was just too slow for me. It was just not something that I had the patience for it to be able to sit there and just do that. I was more of a constantly running, constantly biking kind of person. So basically, because of that, I never took up golf. And then these guys, who I was very friendly with, practice of mine actually at the hospital, would say, "Gary, you got to come play golf with us. You'd be great. You're a golfer. A hockey player and all that. You got the right swing." I'm like, "Guys, I don't know. I just can't do it." And they surprised me with a 2-week golf package to learn golf, basically. And I did it, and I really enjoyed it. It was very educational, but I was just going out of my mind. Basically, I was like, everybody would like finish the day, and I go for a 10-mile run and come back, But at the end, it culminated in a round of 18 holes at the end, and I had been doing fairly well during the week. But what I didn't realize, and I never read anything about this before that, is that hockey players they tend to be very good golfers, because if you think about how you shoot with a hockey puck and how you take a golf swing, they're very, very similar. So I didn't know that because of all those years of hockey, like my, neurologically, my brain was kind of like programmed to have that motion in the right, with all the right components of it. So I did very well during the week. And then when it came to doing the 18 holes, it was literally, almost like a Caddyshack moment, where he's playing golf and he's got the hole in one at the 18th hole. I was shooting, I swear I was shooting under 90.
Wow.
And if anyone who's a golfer, not a golfer, that's really crazy good for somebody who's never played golf in their life. So basically I said to them, they kept saying, "Are you sure you've never played before?" They thought I was like a ringer. And I said, no. And then they said, "Well, tell us about it." And I told them about the hockey. And they said, "Oh, that's why." They said, because hockey players tend to be pretty good even initially with golf. So I did all that, and then I finished the program, and I've only played golf one time after that.
Hey, you went out on top.
But I just couldn't do it. I'm sorry. I just could never play golf. So that's again part of that personality. You got to know who you are, how to really focus it in on what you're trying to accomplish. But then on the other side of it, and we didn't talk about it at all, but I did this all through 36 years of marriage and 4 children. At our peak, I'm proud to say, as being an only child, that at our peak we had 4 kids and 4 dogs at the same time. So Club Goldman was always an experience. And it's also a balance of lifestyle. And I think I think we're seeing it, right? There's so much burnout, and then people come home from a long day and they're exhausted, and having that balance. And Alex, you and I talked a little bit about it. You're at the early end of it. I mean, getting through all that doesn't happen randomly. it happens to, you have to be able to balance. It's just like, your body, and how, how we handle longevity, right? It's all moderation and doing the right things, but really paying attention and tying it all together, So I think it's a very important story to, especially when I talk to my younger colleagues again about these kind of things, is that you really have to balance it all. You can't, work can't be 100% and play can't be 100%. And family then comes in and complicates it. And then of course, well, what's the line? And then, man make plan. And then God looks down and just laughs. So
Yeah, exactly right.
And basically not a religious comment, but just, you never know, it just is what's happening. So you got to leave some room for a change, so to speak, a little bit as well. So that's my lessons
absolutely.
from life, certainly.
I love it. Yeah, those are great lessons. And just to add one more thing to that, I think that's important is a lot of times too, we say, hey, we're doing this for our family. We're building businesses for our family. We're investing in real estate for our family. And sometimes we forget to ask our family, is that what they even want, right? Like, does my wife want me spending the time doing this podcast? Mm-hmm. Luckily she does. But if you don't have those conversations with your spouse, that can lead to a really difficult road ahead. And there's no point in building this really successful business if you lose your wife and kids in the process. And so I think that that's really important to keep in mind, as you're going throughout your career. And so really cool to hear about Club Goldman, and 4 dogs and 4 kids sounds like a wild time.
I don't know if you remember, you may not be old enough to remember that song. It's a family affair.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, that's how I've always joked about that, at the house, is like, because first of all, I do most of it, other than my anesthesia work, I did my office was at the house, right? So I was always there, with the kids doing stuff and all my athletic stuff. So it was always primarily around the house, and it's the family has to be part of it. If it isn't, it's a setup for a lot of stress and, kind of a little bit of disaster, because it'll ultimately, if you're lucky, it doesn't, but it'll ultimately implode. You really just have to be able to, and you can't do it alone. You can't, you have to have people to talk to, and, it's never perfect. I mean, as an only child, I'll tell you, if I had $1 for every time I turned to my wife when all the kids were running around like crazy people, and I'd say, is this normal? And then she'd say, Daddy's going in his office for a little quiet time.
That's awesome. Yeah. All parents need that quiet time. I know I do. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, with the supportive spouse, like I think that is the biggest key to success in life, is having an incredibly supportive spouse who's there for you. I mean, in our partners, our spouses, yeah, well, they go through so much too. If you think about everything that they've gone through, especially if they're with you throughout med school and residency and fellowship and being an attending and, all the craziness that happens. I mean, that is a tough job in itself to be a spouse for a clinician and for a physician. And so it's just difficult. Yeah. Well, Gary, I wanted to ask you a couple questions that I think will help the audience. In your experience, what are some of the biggest barriers that physicians or clinicians face when they're trying to step into more of like a advisory, innovation, or investment role?
Well, clearly there's a number of variables that go into that. There's, personality is part of it, but that's not something you have any control over. How you approach making transitions like that. But I think the part that makes it the most difficult is it's a huge transition from what we do and how we're trained, even from, from the OR to the C-suite, right? And the other part of it is, which makes it interesting, especially if it's like in a business environment or whatever. I mean, I think many of us get a little bit of a complex, so to speak, is like, again, it's not on the name here, but you mentioned I have an MBA, and I didn't get the MBA because I really needed the education for it. But it turns out that when a clinician enters the business environment, all that the other side tends to see is the doctor, or, it's a clinician, and they spent, X number of years of their life doing that. And now they're doing this. They don't think, oh, this is the CEO of X company, whatever. I'm not saying that even psychologically that makes any sense, but that's what's the attitude that's out there. And it's even worse, and again, I hope nobody, gets upset about this, but the problem is that, to make that transition as a clinician into the C-suite, unless you do it in a gradual fashion where you're educating yourself, if you come to a new place and you're in this business position, it's going to be a little bit of a demeaning experience experience from the many times that I've seen it happen, because the expectations that are there are maybe unreasonable in many cases, where if you're well prepared for it or you did it gradually. So I would say that's a much safer way to do it. But, there are those of us that also do cold turkey things and do fine with it. But if you're going to take that approach, then of course it's the preparation. Take a Stanley Kaplan for going from from clinical medicine into the administrative or business environment. But I think very few of us, even get that opportunity. I think nowadays what's frankly more, probably an easier transition, but more interesting, is medical school to C-suite without very much, not even really an internship, or if you're lucky, there is an internship in there, to get that real clinical being in the trenches experience that is, it's invaluable. It's a year of your life you paid for it, even if just in an internship, but it puts your perspective in the way you look at workflows and certainly solutions within healthcare that, it gives you an approach to things which maybe is, it includes more than just the business aspect of it. And I think that's really important. Yeah, I hope I went off on a tangent a little bit there, but I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. That is really helpful. What trends have you seen recently, maybe in the digital health space or innovation space or VC space, that you think that physicians should pay closer attention to?
Well, again, technology is changing at the speed of light. And I frequently speak on this subject. And, the bottom line is that if you even look at it from a clinical research perspective, the medical knowledge base is doubling every 78 days. Okay, so you've got to handle all that data, but it also shows the importance of using the right devices to manage the data. But let's take a step back, and I think the data part is huge. I think that right now, having been involved in the digital revolution since 1991, and probably even a little before that, I've seen the changes and I've seen the increase, the slope of the curve, so to speak, of change, but it was gradual. And then when it came to digital health, the adoption for digital health, historically has been very, very slow because, and again, for appropriate reasons, clinicians are not fast adopters. We have to see that something is safe and has good outcomes, and it's not, right? It can't be an N of 1, and it can't be a 2-day study. It has to be true clinical research that meets all the criteria, and that takes time and it takes effort. So because of that, most clinicians, and I think, it's probably a negative in the business world sometimes, because sometimes you got to take some chance, and clinicians tend to be pretty conservative about things. But it's also the risk-averse part of it too, which, look, in our profession, when we train, when we make mistakes, unfortunately, some terrible things can happen. And look, as I've said to many a friend, there are good plumbers and there are bad plumbers. And do you think that we're not a different race here? We're all humans on Earth, and we're fallible also. Not saying it's bad or good or whatever. It just is what it is. And I think sometimes the expectations we put on ourselves can be very difficult also. So for me, that, the big changes are what's coming right now, because now the slope of the curve is very, very steep because of, I don't use the artificial word. If you ever want to clear a room out of physicians, say artificial intelligence. I use the machine learning, which is the appropriate term, or the term that I'll use, and especially in a clinical setting, is assisted intelligence. Its purpose is to, think of like any profession, we're all a bell curve. Okay. And the middle 60% of the bell curve is all of us who are practicing relatively good medicine, following standards, following protocols, and having good outcomes. We're also within the reasons of expectation. Okay. But there's always the other side of the bell curves, right? Now, on the right side of the bell curve, they don't need our help. They're either all academians who are chairman of the department, or they're incredibly successful in business, or whatever it is, but they're the bell curve. No, but from a knowledge perspective, they're the percent that they far exceed most of us. But then on the left side of the bell curve are those clinicians, look, they got through med school. What was the old joke that my uncle used to tell me? He says, what do you call the guy with the lowest passing score on the medical boards? And I said, what? Doc. He goes, doctor. So there you go, right? So look, not everybody's going to be, incredible at what they do, and they're going to be good plumbers and bad plumbers, as I said, but we have the luxury that a lot of of what we do outside of the proceduralist kind of things is cerebral, right? And some people have better memories than others, but at the end of the day, we all got through med school and we're capable of using and doing that critical thinking, especially when we have resources at our disposal to make it easier for those of us that don't have photographic memories or whatever type of learning or benefit that you might have because of your genomic, a person's genomic profile. There are some that really can get to that point with some assistance. And it's not solutions that are making diagnoses and they're not treating patients. What they're doing is they're providing the clinicians who already critically think already with more information and more ability to digest much larger amounts of information to what's relevant based on your thinking as a clinician, and then assisting you in making a decision in a particular way. I mean, some of the technology that I see, I'll see 7 or at least get introduced to 5 to 7 new companies every day, okay, through our network and our fund. And basically, when you have that when you see a lot of that, it's pretty incredible. And some of them, you say, well, how are we going to accomplish that? And does that make sense because of XYZ clinically? But there are certain things where you can't believe how much information can be digested and then presented in a way where, look, if you can rule out normal, which is, let's say, 60%. There was a great article that came out just recently. I think it came out of Scotland, where they were looking at mammograms and they were using assisted, machine learning intelligence to help. And it turned out that in that system, they had to have two radiologists come up with a reading. And if they couldn't agree, they'd bring a third in. And so it was a very cumbersome system that included a lot of clinicians, and they had in the middle of clinician shortage. And they needed to create a piece of software that could look at the radiographs. Okay. And I mean, look at the mammogram. Yeah. And read it looking for only pathology, based on the pixels. Right. And if it could just eliminate pathology, normal versus abnormal, and, computers are very good at identifying abnormal, but then getting into what it is, another kind of human component of it. So they said, absolutely, let's do this. And it turned out statistically that 60% of the mammograms were normal. And in those studies, of course, they were also approved by the clinicians as well. So now they only needed clinicians to do 40% of the work that they were doing before. Yeah. And when you start using technology like that, I mean, it's going to revolutionize the way we practice, medicine. And the prediction I will make is, the one thing that I tell everybody is the future of healthcare is data. Okay. Not what we collect it with, but it's what we do with it and how we utilize it in a machine learning way to benefit us, for the things that we have to do. And we're there, we're basically there now. And my prediction is that within the next 5 years, we are going to have so much technology at our fingertips that's going to help us provide better clinical care, which includes genomic databases and phenomic databases and, climate ecological databases, all tied together in a very precision way to take care of people individually based on all of those criteria. And no human could do that. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Whereas these machines now are capable of doing these kind of things. And you see it, and you see how quickly it's happening. That is, to me, how it's going to change. It's not going to put us out of business, but we certainly won't need as many of us to practice outside of the proceduralist side of it. So
it's a tool. It's an amazing tool. For me, when I really realized wow, this is unbelievable, was my buddy was deployed to Africa. He's also in the Air Force, and he was deployed in Africa, and he sent me a picture and kind of a quick, summary statement of what was going on with this individual is deployed with. And he's like, hey man, what do you think this is? And I had just got back from a wilderness medicine conference, and I was like, that looks like cutaneous labral migrans. But I was like, let me just see, let me put in this information in ChatGPT and put in the picture and see what it says. Mm-hmm. So I put in all the information, put in the picture, and it comes back and was like, that looks like cutaneous labral migrans. And that's when I was like, oh wow, this is amazing that I was able to put in that information, put in that picture, and it was able to figure this out. And it was. And so it was wild. That's when I was like, wow, this is such an incredible tool that if we don't adapt this as physicians, or if we're stubborn and in our old way of, this is how it's always been mentality, we're missing out on so many great great tools that can completely revolutionize how we take care of patients, how we treat patients, and provide way better care for them. So it is really cool. And I'm sure you've seen way more amazing stuff, but that, and I'm a huge fan of using the machine learning scribe that listens in and helps dictate your notes. That saved me a ton of time in the office and those sorts of things, that it's like, hey, this is just getting it to where I can have more of a relationship when I'm taking care of patients. I can look them in the eye and talk to them about what's going on and trust that, hey, this is being captured, this is being documented. Of course, it needs to be tweaked and all those sorts of things, but it's still really, really helpful. And I can't believe how far we've come in the last year and a half. I cannot imagine what it's going to look like in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's hard to even understand how far we will come in the next 5 years. Yeah, that's the science fiction part of it a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, I do always say thank you. So hopefully it remembers me when it comes to take over. But absolutely. Well, Dr. Goldman, I want to be respectful of your time. I wanted to ask you, what's one actionable step that a physician who's listening to us today can take if they want to get involved in this digital health revolution?
Well, yeah, I would say that, and again, no matter what stage you are in your career, you can take advantage of this. Basically, by joining our Global Health Impact Network, okay, and it's free, as a member, we have several thousand clinicians now, many of which are more of the low-hanging fruit from when the time that we first started the platform across multiple specialties and professions who are collaborating about innovation, basically, from an educational perspective. We have education available, and we connect up with lots of other web-based organizations that produce a lot of content on YouTube and all of that. We promote all of that in our network agnostically, and we provide a place for the clinicians and on their time, when available on the internet, to be able to collaborate with other clinicians in their field that around different topics. And it can be specialty specific, it could be technology specific. We have communities on blockchain and AI and VR, and then sub communities that go like AR and cardiology, AI and radiology, AI and and chiropractic. So we have the ability to create all of these collaborative communities amongst the physicians, and we basically use that and leverage it on the business side as these groups of individuals tend to collaborate and come up with ideas, and that starts the innovation part of it. And then we sometimes identify one or two people, say, God, I would love to be, explore the business side of this. And that's the one who ends up being the founder / CEO. So, it's a progressive experience on our network, and you can do as much or as little as you want, but it's very rewarding because, again, it's a safe place that's only clinicians, and the communities are very, very private. So we can monitor who's in what community based on the different communities and threads they have. It supports video content. We have educational content on there. So it's Global Health Impact Network, and the website would be just the same, www.globalhealthimpactnetwork.net. And it's probably the best way to reach us. And then I can also be found, as you see on the screen, and LinkedIn as well. I found you on LinkedIn. That's how I found you. Yeah, which was awesome. And we'll be sure to put the website for Global Health Impact Network in the show notes that'd be great
as well for folks. Yeah. Dr. Goldman, this has been great. It's been so fun getting to chat with you, learn about your experience, learn about your journey, and look into the future of what's to come. So I'm excited. We'll have to redo this podcast in 5 years and see what it looks like in the intersection of clinical care and innovation and what it looks like at that point in time. So really looking forward to that and appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you. I one of the other things that we should definitely do is, I love what you're doing and the whole, range of topics that you have on this podcast, and we can make it available on our network to all the members as well, and kind of help you market it, so to speak, and present it out there. So you just kind of made me think about that. So we should be doing that as well. So we'll have to stay in touch.
Absolutely. That sounds amazing. Yeah, folks, come find me on the Global Health Impact Network. Dr. Goldman, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. It's been Dr. Gary Goldman and Dr. Alex Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. Signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews. and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.